Carroll, bringing it forward. Thompson's making the run. Carroll hangs on to it though. Still Davy Carroll. Could go all the way here. Oh, what a goal!
Hello, I'm Phil Catchpole and welcome to another episode of Ringing the Blues. On this week's show we have all the action and reaction from the FA Cup third round tie against Preston North End. Plus we have a familiar voice in Philip Barker talking about his time commentating on the Wanderers in the 90s.
Cousins, he's done it! Jason Cousins has scored in the first minute of the FA Trophy final.
The Chairboys were looking to get into the fourth round of the FA Cup for only the third time in their history. Championship rivals Preston North End were the opponents at Adams Park. Here's what happened. Commentary from Sam Avery and Ollie Bayliss.
Why wouldn't you want to progress and give it all the respect in the world? I will be feeling as strong a team I can to go and win that game because I think we owe it to the fans who are watching at home, to the people who've supported us all the time. Every single game I want to win.
That's a good run from Musgrave towards the back post. Onyedinma's header goes in. He rose highest, Onyedinma, beat Rafferty in the air and runs away in celebration. It's Wycombe who take the lead very early on here, and Fred Onyedinma back in the starting 11, back amongst the goals, getting on the end of Musgrave's cross. And on his Wycombe debut, Musgrave with an assist. It was Onyedinma who won the header, and it's Wycombe who lead Preston by a goal to nil. Wycombe very much in the ascendancy as Piezu turns in a similar position to where he did for his goal against Middlesbrough. He's gone down inside the area and he's won Wycombe Wanderers a penalty. Jacobson then up against Connor Ripley to double Wycombe's advantage. Left-footed, straight down the middle, and Joe Jacobson doubles Wycombe's lead over Preston.
Free kick to Wycombe Wanderers fairly central. Jacobson floats one in towards the penalty area. It's flicked on, kept alive at the far post by Wheeler, and it's tucked home, cut across the penalty area. It's Josh Knight scores for Wycombe Wanderers 8 yards out, and that may well be game over here at Adams Park. It's Wycombe Wanderers 3, Preston North End 0. Chance for Preston to come forward on the right hand side. Emil Rees, can he get there ahead of the goalkeeper? He can. Rees flicks it past Allsop. Is it going to be a penalty? Penalty to Preston. Emil Rees, the man who's going to take it for Preston, shoots and scores for the visitors. Ryan Allsop dived the wrong way, and it's just given a little window of an opportunity for the visitors to get back into this FA Cup third round tie. Wycombe Wanderers 3, Preston 1. Chance for Horgan now for Wycombe at the other end. Horgan is the feet of Alex Samuel. Alex Samuel for Wycombe. Alex Samuel finishes the game and puts Wycombe Wanderers through to the fourth round of the FA Cup for only the third time in their history. Wycombe Wanderers 4, Preston 1.
Gareth, good job, well done, into the next round.
Well, that's what it was about today, Matt Bloomfield was saying that in the dressing room before the game, How often have Wycombe Wanderers been in the third round? Usually we have to fight and scrap and win all sorts of games to get into the third round. Because of the championship status, you get in the third round automatically. It was nice. So let's get in the fourth round, and that's, I've just been told it's only the third time we've done that, and that's brilliant for the club, and really proud of the performance today. Some boys who haven't been playing came in, showed me what they can do. Team selection headaches for the next game, and that's what I want as a manager. It's a great club to be involved with. The owners have backed me from day one of this season, and I'd like to give Rob Couhig a cup run. He's a big fan of the FA Cup over in New Orleans, and hopefully he'll be smiling on that result.
New strike partnership, and both got off to a blistering start in the first 10 minutes, both involved in the first two goals.
Yeah, Admiral Musgrave is an unknown. We can't go out and get your Jordan Rhodes or your Charlie Austins or all these Premier League strikers that people are fancying at the moment to bring into the Championship to make the difference. We just can't do that, and we have to go out there and find these unpolished gems, and Admiral is certainly one of those. I thought he had a really assured performance today. His energy levels were brilliant. He could have scored. I think he's disappointed he hasn't scored, but like you say, he's assisted one. He's been a constant threat all game, and playing off Uchi there, I thought he was superb. Hopefully there'll be more business to come. Josh Knight, again, his loan extended, was was great business by Andrew Howard and the backing of the Couigs again. Can't thank him enough. Without those, I wouldn't be able to get performances like this on the pitch. So it's a real team effort today. I'm really proud of the boys.
You talked about before how performances have been very good. Was a result like this justice for the performances this season?
You've got to stick the ball in the goal. Performances have always been good, barring 2 or 3 games after that first 7 where we were taught a lot of lessons. So I'd say the Barnsley game, the Middlesbrough game, we've been out the game. All the others we've been in them, but we haven't stuck the ball in the goal. Today we took our chances, and when they were there, we stuck that ball in the net, and that's going to be crucial now from now to the end of the season if we have any chance of surviving in this league. But players like Addy and Uchi and then Akinfenwa, where Alex Samuel gets a goal, these are important moments for us, and hopefully we'll breed confidence for the games coming up.
Into the 4th round for only the 3rd time in the club's history. They've taken you to White Hart Lane, Villa Park 20 years ago. Is there anyone you fancy in the 4th round?
Anyone, at the moment with the situation with the fans, it'd be nice to be at home because 70,000 fans at Old Trafford won't happen. That'd be awesome. So anyone at home would be nice for us. I'm a big believer in the FA Cup. The Ainsworth household was always a big fan back in the 80s and 90s, and I'll treat it with the utmost respect, and hopefully we can get a cup run this season. It'd be great.
So the Preston fans were none too pleased with the result on Saturday. Here's their thoughts after the game. Ray Phil.
Alex Neil, you're an embarrassment. What you've done to this club this week is beyond the pale. You've embarrassed supporters with your stellar signing, Ched Evans. And now you stand there with your hands in your pockets whilst this once proud club are embarrassed by a team like Wycombe. We are twice winners of the FA Cup, yet you've done nothing but totally disrespect it from the moment you arrived. Just F off and take your stellar signing with you.
Preston lad.
Absolutely twatted by the bottom team in our division, who don't score many goals and have the worst defensive record. Bloody disgraceful.
From 91.
Wycombe have only scored 21 goals in all competitions this season, and 6 of them have been against us. I bet they wish they could play us every week.
Walmer 88.
It must be great to be in a profession where you can get away with such a poor performance and still get paid more than most mere mortals. If any of us were that poor in our workplaces, we'd be out on our ears. There's no excuse for such a lack of effort.
York White.
The fact that many of our players were smiling and chatting with the Wycombe players at the end tells you everything you need to know about how much that game meant to the gaffer and his squad.
Mooney Magic.
Call me a bedwetter if you like, but that was complete crap. I don't care if it was a changed team. If we don't have a single player able to match Wycombe bleeding Wanderers, then they need gone.
Big Mark Leonard.
Today is the first time I actually think it would be best if we parted ways with Alex Neil. I'd swap him for Ainsworth in a heartbeat, seeing as one of them is decent and hopefully still has a place in his heart for us. Neil is just a money-grabbing chancer.
Euro PNE.
Neil was seriously shown up by Gareth Ainsworth again today for the 2nd time this season. They were far better prepared and organised, with far more heart and effort.
Tom.
It was only 3 years ago that we went there and beat Wycombe 5-1. Today we were totally outplayed and could have conceded 7 or 8. the club is stagnating in front of us.
Wibble.
I'm disappointed and annoyed in equal measure. Where was the fight? Where was the desire? Fair play to Wycombe though, they were far the better team today and thoroughly deserved the result.
It's a sizable run, Cornwall, which Arthur Williams is trying to line up. Cousins, he's done it! Jason Cousins has scored in the first minute of the FA Trophy final. Carroll, Andy Kerr, 2-0, and the man whose goal against Cheltenham started this trophy run off has scored at Wembley, and now Wycombe had taken what could be a very significant advantage indeed. So Guppy with the corner, coming up to the hour mark, and Wycombe still leading by 2-1. It's there! And Steve Thompson has made it 3. Scott, Thompson, Cousins. Lovely football by Wycombe. Carroll. It's there! And David Carroll has made it 4-1. Glyn Creaser leads Wycombe up to collect the FA Trophy. How appropriate it should be. The popular Wycombe skipper, who but for an accident would surely have been playing today. It's a famous old trophy made of antique silver. So Bert Millichip hands it over to Glyn Creaser, and the FA Trophy belongs to Wycombe Wanderers.
Right, on the line now is a voice familiar to many of you. In fact, if you listen to this podcast regularly, it's the first voice that you hear every single week. It's a commentator that cuts his teeth covering his beloved Chairboys, and it's Philip Barker. Philip, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's a real pleasure to get you on here as well. As I've just said, it's that goal, the iconic Carroll goal at Wembley. And when I was thinking about the introductions for this podcast, I thought, well, it needs to be a goal, and what's the most iconic goal? And I thought about Easton Doe, and then I thought about Davy Carroll's second one at Wembley, and for me, it could only be that goal at Wembley for Dave Carroll.
It was such a marvellous goal, the way he took it through, and it was Ricky Villa-esque, really. Ricky Villa had obviously scored for Spurs in the FA Cup final in 1981. I think it might have been at that very same end, because the ground was... that time the television cameras were there, so obviously Carroll took it and just kept going and then lashed it in, and it went in off one post and into the back of those wonderful Wembley nets, and that really set up that marvellous match against Preston. It was one of the great classic encounters, really, a game that swung both ways, and eventually Wycombe, in their first season in the Football League, actually gained promotion. It was extraordinary.
Yeah, wonderful times. And let's start at the very beginning. When did your relationship with Wycombe Wanderers start?
Well, we'd moved to High Wycombe in 1970. I was born in London, and I was invited to go and see Wycombe Wanderers play an amateur cup quarter-final against Skelmersdale in 1971. And just looking back at the attendances now, 10,000 inside the old Lokes Park ground, which must have been pretty uncomfortable. I do remember that before the game, there was a great atmosphere of rivalry between the two sets of supporters. And somebody from Skelmersdale would come out with a white balloon and place it on the centre circle. And then somebody from Wycombe would come out with a light blue balloon and stamp out the white one and place the light blue balloon on the centre circle. And this went on for some time before eventually they got bored of it. I'd love to say there was a happy ending to that match, but Skelmersdale eventually won 3-0 and went on to lift the trophy. And Wycombe never were able, even in that golden era of the 1970s, to reach the final at Wembley. The closest they got was in 1972 when they lost to Hendon up at Brentford's Griffin Park, another ground now that no longer exists.
So, early 70s, as a fan then at the start, but when did you start getting behind the mic and covering Wycombe Wanderers as a journalist?
Well, funnily enough, it was at school, because a call went out they needed commentators to help with the service beaming the matches to the hospitals. And so somebody read out in assembly that they needed football commentators. And I went along and really started from that. The first Wycombe Wanderers match I did was actually up at Cheshire United in the Berks and Bucks Cup in 1978. And it went to extra time. And eventually Wycombe scored. All the goals came in extra time. It was 3-1 and Wycombe went through. It wasn't a particularly edifying game, but that was the first. And of course, in those days, the pitches were nothing like what they play on now. Almost pristine like carpet, but in those days it was heavy, cloying mud. And when you see the skill that some of the players managed to do, I can remember in the early 70s, Wycombe had great cup runs. And one of the first games I went to see was the Wycombe Wanderers and Newport County game in 1973. It was a first round FA Cup tie, and it was so taut and tense. 0-0 at half-time. Newport hit the bar early in the second half, and then Wycombe managed to score a couple of goals. Everybody went absolutely nuts, and eventually ran out winners by 3-1 and lost to Peterborough in the next round. But it was just the foretaste of what was to come in 1975, the never-to-be-forgotten match against Middlesbrough, which was televised on the big match. It actually went out on the Sunday afternoon, but there was great excitement that Brian Moore was bringing the big match cameras right down to Lokes Park. And just looking back at the film of the game or the television pictures of the game, you can see the snow around. So it must have been a bitterly cold day to watch the game. It finished 0-0. Wycombe were a whisker away from going through. Alan Phillips just couldn't connect with a header down at the hospital end. And it finished 0-0, and Wycombe, of course, eventually lost the replay. But some golden memories there. And then I started doing Wycombe Wanderers television commentary in the early 90s, which was a pretty good time to be doing it because Martin O'Neill had just taken over as manager and Wycombe had moved to Adams Park. And the good times really were starting to roll. That first season, level, an FA Trophy win in 1991, followed by a marvellous campaign in what was then the Conference, in which they finished level on points with Colchester, a real rivalry at that time. When you think that in the 70s, Wycombe's rivals were the likes of Hendon, Enfield, Walton and Hersham, and then, of course, much later, Slough Town. Then it was Colchester United, and there was a love-hate relationship with the Colchester manager, Roy McDonough. And Wycombe finished level on points that season, but didn't go up. But that just really was the prelude to perhaps the greatest season that Wycombe have ever had. They won the Conference and they reached the FA Trophy final for a second time and won that as well. So they did a non-league double. The trophy was absolutely extraordinary, the way that they seemed destined to win. And they had something about Runcorn that season, because I seem to remember that Steve Guppy scored a wonderful weaving goal at Adams Park in one of the closing matches of the season that all but sealed the championship against Runcorn. That was one of the more memorable games. And they had a cup run too. They met West Brom in the FA Cup. It was televised on Sky. Marvellous performance, a real storybook performance, in fact, because they were trailing by 2-0, looked absolutely down and out. Ozzy Ardiles was managing West Brom, and they were playing the kind of football that he espoused, beautiful on-the-ground football with Simon Garner looking the class act that he was to turn out at Wycombe. And then Wycombe came back in the, dying stages, the last 20 minutes or so. Glyn Creaser from the corner, and then Steve Thompson going through and scoring. And that got a lot of airplay on Sky Sports News over the following weeks, or at least on Sky Soccer Weekend. I remember coming down to report on how they'd prepared for the replay. They went out that year, but the consolation, of course, was that promotion to the Football League, which for many people had seemed a holy grail that would never happen. The club was very much part of the amateur era, and to imagine that they would then go into the Football League and then up and gradually work their way up towards the Championship you think what the founding fathers would have thought of that. It would have been inconceivable for them, surely.
It is incredible. And listening back to those games, I mean, I was on the terrace for a lot of those games in the Adams Park era. And I look back on YouTube, as I'm sure lots of other fans do as well. And it's your voice describing all of those magic moments. That must be quite special for you.
Well, I'm very, very lucky to have been able to do that because I support two teams and I look for both their results, Tottenham Hotspur and Wycombe Wanderers. And both teams have over the years given some great moments. You know, the FA Cup tie against West Brom was absolutely fantastic. It was a great showcase for the club. Everybody was very excited because Sky's cameras were down there, and a source of great pride that they acquitted themselves so well over the two matches. I know I used to work for Sky Soccer Weekend at that time, and I know that there was doubt about actually featuring Wycombe Wanderers, a non-league team. It was deemed a risk. You know, you've got Manchester United versus Manchester City was the other billing that day. But having a non-league team, what if they go 3 or 4 goals down? They'd seen how other Buckinghamshire teams, Marlow and Aylesbury United, had lost heavily to West Brom in previous seasons, but they went with the instincts and they got an absolutely great story out of it. And Wycombe really became on everybody's lips from then on. Everybody knew Wycombe Wanderers because of Martin O'Neill as well. His personal charisma had such a great effect at that time that everybody was talking about them. And a lot of the players were able to build their reputations. You had Steve Guppy, who eventually went on to play for Leicester, and then, having played at non-league level for England, also played for the full international team.
You mentioned Martin O'Neill there. I mean, as part of your match day duties commentating for Wycombe TV, were you able to? Was there post-match interview duties with Martin O'Neill as well?
Sometimes, yes, and often he would arrange to do an interview in the week for the video or some kind of preview, and you always thought you had gold dust. But he was very, very clever that he didn't give too much away. He always spoke very well. But when you came back, you thought, well, I've got a real exclusive here. I know exactly how he's going to play. And then you listened to what he'd said, and it all sounded very good. But he was keeping his cards very close to his chest. At training sessions, he didn't used to turn up a lot of the time. It was Paul Franklin or one of the other coaches, Jim Melvin or whoever, and they would be working with the players. And I suspect he learnt a little bit from Brian Clough, because Clough would often go AWOL for days on end, and they'd only see him. The players never knew when he was going to turn up. But he built this wonderful network at Wycombe. He had John Robertson, who older listeners might remember, was a fantastic winger for Nottingham Forest in the 1970s when they won the European Cup twice, which sounds extraordinary now, but he even scored the goal that won one of the finals. And Robinson and O'Neill were great chums, and he brought him down to do some work for Wycombe. And the whole sort of atmosphere that he inculcated was everything was for the club, and it looked like he was having a laugh a lot of the time, but it was all deadly serious, and he was fiercely competitive. And some of his altercations with referees would bear that out. But you always used to say, just stick a camera on him when the team are in action. Just put one of the ISO cameras on Martin O'Neill and you'll get some gold dust. And his reaction, he was never sitting in his seat for more than about 10 seconds at any one time. And the crowd absolutely adored him because he did throw his absolute heart and soul into it. And even his daughters did, because they'd lost I think it was before the 1991 FA Trophy final. They'd lost a Berks and Bucks Cup match. And the daughters were very upset that they might have to go to school and they might be made fun of because they'd lost. But anyway, they went to Wembley and they were dressed in their finery to walk out onto the field. They weren't very old in those days, and they looked absolutely fantastic, as if they were going to a family wedding or something. But as it turned out, it was a great family celebration because, of course, Wycombe won the trophy for the first time against Kidderminster. Fabulous goal by Mark West, who'd also scored in the semi-final, the emotional moment when they'd actually gone through and beaten Altrincham, a team that was always their bogey team over the years, and to beat them in a semi-final on their turf was quite something. And that really lit the touch paper, and from then on it was high-flying throughout the time that Martin O'Neill was there until he eventually departed from the club. And many will say that it was never quite the same again, although Laurie Sanchez, of course, came close in 2001, taking the team to the brink of Wembley in the FA Cup.
You mentioned Middlesbrough in the FA Cup 1975. Saturday just gone. Wycombe played Middlesbrough in the Championship, in the league, level pegging in terms of tier. You can't have imagined that we'd be talking about a game like that when you were in from 1975, would you?
No, and the manager of Middlesbrough in 1975 was one Jack Charlton. And he had Graham Souness in his side and players of that calibre. And they went to Wycombe. Very sloping pitch, Lokes Park in those days. It was one of the features. Barnet's and Wycombe's ground were both sloping pitches and very difficult to run on. And it was extraordinary. You wouldn't have known which side was the First Division side and which side was in the Isthmian League, which Wycombe were in at that time. And they just gave it everything. And to draw with them on that occasion, and for it to be televised in that way. I mean, there were a whole stream of teams at that level who were performing well at that time. Leatherhead, there was a chap called Chris Kelly who they called the Leatherhead Lip, and Wycombe had a big rivalry with them as well. And they managed to give Leicester an awful fight in the FA Cup up at Filbert Street. And Wycombe, and then you had Wimbledon with Dickie Guy from the Southern League saving a penalty from Peter Lorimer. So these were very exciting times, and it was great that Wycombe were part of that whole narrative of the FA Cup in the mid-70s, because they'd always been a very good league team. But the Cups didn't seem to be so high on the priority. But of course, the FA Cup particularly is what gets you noticed. It's where names are made. It's all about the glory, as somebody once said. And, you know, Wycombe did have their fair share of glory in the 1970s. I remember they played Reading in the FA Cup when the late Robin Friday was playing for Reading, who was always described as one of the best players that you never saw. He was a real maverick in the mould of a Stan Bowles, Frank Worthington and that sort of thing. And it was so mind-numbingly cold at Lokes Park that day. It was a really icy day, and Reading eventually won 2-1. But, you know, these were days when you queue to get a ticket outside the ground. The ground was in the centre of High Wycombe, little ramshackle stands, and it became known that tickets for a certain match were on sale. And there'd be queues all around past the Church of England School down towards the gas holders in the centre of town just to get a ticket for one of these matches. And you'd see the people coming down across Tom Burt's Hill from Marlow to come down to the ground as they came in, because Wycombe, of course, is full of hills. And just cramming into that little tiny ground on a big match day was very, very special indeed.
Where was your commentary position at Lokes Park?
It was behind one of the goals up at the hospital end in a little hut, which made it rather difficult. Wycombe in those days did not wear the quarters. By the mid to late 60s, they'd gone in common with a lot of teams to one colour, and they wore light blue shirts, dark blue shorts and light blue socks. The only trouble was that the numbers on those shirts were either red or, by the time I started commentating, pale yellow, which made them very, very difficult to read. So you really did have to know the players. And watching it from one end, of course, you haven't got the advantage of being in the centre of the ground, which is the ideal position for a commentary. And it got very gloomy at the other end as well. But I still managed to pick a few goals. Against Bishop Auckland in the FA Trophy one year, there was a corner came in, and I was lucky enough to pick the scorer. It was a chap called Anton Vixaus, who later came back into the side in the 90s. And he got right up at the far post and headed home. And it was the first time that Wycombe had really been on level terms with Bishop Auckland, who'd been their nemesis in the 1950s when the Bishops were the amateur team, bar none, in the whole country. So that was a great moment. But, it was still quite difficult to pick them out. And when they went to a certain kit manufacturer which has 3 stripes and almost illegible numbers on the back, that made it, and shiny shirts, that made it even more difficult. But it's all good training to actually commentate in the most testing of circumstances. It just gets you going for later on. And of course, having scores fed through your ears, taking talkback and all that sort of thing, it sets you up for a career in the big world. So it was good fun.
Yeah, all wonderful experience. And when did you finish covering Wycombe, and what did you go on to?
It was about 1996. I work as a TV and I'm a freelance journalist. I write and broadcast from time to time on the Olympic Games and such things. So I did television commentary on Wycombe for about 4 or 5 years, but then the pressure of other work made it more difficult, harder and harder to get down to the ground, which is always a problem if that's not your main job. So, but they were golden years, and I was lucky enough in 2001 to go back with Sky Soccer Weekend to interview Jack Adams, the son of Frank, after whom, of course, the ground is named. He was by that time the patron of the team. He wasn't well enough to travel to Villa Park for the semi-final, but we showed him some clips of the 1931 Amateur Cup final, which he'd been at when Wycombe won at Highbury. And I think they're probably about one of the very few teams in the world to have a completely unbeaten record at Highbury, because they played a couple of Amateur Cup semi-finals there and never lost one. So their record is very impressive. But Jack Adams was a wonderful chap, and he told us all about how proud he was of his father, who had actually gifted the ground to the club back in 1947. He'd acquired the deeds off Lord Carrington, and if you walk into Adams Park to this day, there's a big blue plaque recording the fact with a wonderful Wycombe swan on the top, and it's a great thing to see. And that tells the story of how the original ground was sold to Frank Adams, who then gave it as a gift to Wycombe Wanderers. And that is why the new ground, or I say the new ground, it's 1990. Gosh, that's 30 years ago. All right, we'll say the nearly new ground is called Adams Park in his honour. So it was a great thrill to meet his son. I think he enjoyed the cup run with Roy Essendoe and others, taking Wycombe all the way to the semi-finals of the FA Cup, and a really marvellous time again to be reporting on them.
Philip, it's wonderful to chat to you, because you've got this encyclopedic knowledge that reporters tend to always have, no matter what they're covering. This will be a tough question for you. What would be your 1 or 2 or 3 highlights of your time covering Wycombe? What were the moments that you really savour?
Goodness. Obviously the Dave Carroll goal at Wembley in 1994, but also the other Wembley goal that I recall was 1993, to score in the first minute Jason Cousins' ballistic free kick against Runcorn in the FA Trophy final. That was a memorable moment. Glyn Creaser scoring the goal that started the recovery against West Brom in the FA Cup. Steve Guppy, we talked about his goal in the match against Runcorn in 1993 again. And just a couple of others. Wycombe's first fixture in the Football League. Now, you would have thought the computer would have given a nice local derby or something that all the fans could have celebrated and been home for tea time. Wycombe Wanderers were sent to Carlisle, possibly the furthest away you could get, and it meant an overnight stay and then a long trip up there. I'd love to say that I called the first goal by Wycombe impeccably for the club video that day. It was a right old scramble, and Wycombe's first goal in the Football League was actually an own goal by Chris Curran of Carlisle, who later scored in the game. The first Wycombe Wanderers goal scored by a Wycombe player, I did get right. It was Steve Guppy, and that was, I think it made it 2-1 in the match, just from memory. It was a close range effort, but I did get that right. So that was a memorable moment to actually call the first goal that Wycombe had actually scored in a Football League match. And once they got through that game, then the following week, the first league goal at home against Chester, I think it was. And, from then on, the memories just come. But I think going to Wembley a few times with them and just seeing the excitement, and then, after the game, after the matches at Wembley, I remember us going back and watching some of the tapes, the rushes, as you call it in TV terms, which is the raw footage. And Martin O'Neill's two daughters came in, and they sat very quietly. Nobody said anything. We were watching this footage of him jumping up and down and living every moment. And then at the end, they got up very politely and said, "Thank you for allowing me to watch my dad." And they left, and of course, it was an absolute pleasure. But watching those games at Wembley and seeing the cavalcade of Wycombe fans driving along the West Wycombe Road with all the colours flying, and down at the station as well, it was very, very special, those times. And I think that anybody who lived through that period of the early 90s following the club will probably say the same, that it was pretty unforgettable.
Magic days indeed, Philip. It's so lovely to relive them with you as a man who was calling the action and making memories for everyone on YouTube who's maybe was too young or wasn't around then to watch it. So you live on forever in Wycombe history.
I don't know about that, but I was just lucky enough to be able to remember the names of the players. I mean, admittedly, you've only got 11 on each side, but in a moment of excitement, just finding the right words is always the great thing, that that you've nailed it. You've got the identity of the player right at the right moment, to give them due credit, because they're the real stars.
Well, Phil, it's been a real pleasure to get you on the podcast. As I say, you're on every week anyway, because the Idents have got that Dave Carroll goal, which you absolutely captured perfectly on that day at Wembley. And it's great to hear that you're still involved in sport and still following the Chairboys too.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, everybody was very proud when they reached the championship. I've still never quite got my head around the way they keep reorganising the leagues. From what I remember, the championship, the trophy you get for winning that used to be what you got for being champions of England, but there we are. But the only real sadness is because of the COVID outbreak, that so few people have actually got to experience this season in the Football League's higher echelons, the highest that Wycombe have ever been, which is a long way from the Great Western League, the Athenian League, the Isthmian League, and even the Conference. And it's such a shame that everything has pretty much taken place behind closed doors. And the hope is that Wycombe will still be in the Championship when the crowds are allowed to come back.
Right, that's your lot for this week. Many thanks to Philip Barker, Sam Avery and Ollie Bayliss. Remember, FA Cup 4th and 5th round draw, Monday night, 7 p.m. Come on, you Blues.